The morning light in San Valdero carried a particular quality in September of 1947, golden and thick, like honey spreading across the Spanish tile roofs and dusty streets. Our projectionist arrived at the Orpheum Picture House at 7:30 sharp, as he had every morning for the past 20 months, his key turning in the side door lock with the practiced ease of a safecracker who'd gone legitimate. He was 42 years old, though the gray threading through his dark hair suggested a man who'd seen more years, or perhaps just more life. The slight hitch in his left leg, a souvenir from a torpedo that found his destroyer off Guadalcanal, gave him a rolling gait that Tommy Kowalski, the eager young usher, said made him walk like a cowboy. "More like a sailor on permanent shore leave," he'd reply, which was closer to the truth anyway. The projection booth sat at the top of 23 stairs, each one creaking its own particular note. He knew them like a pianist knows scales. Step 15 always groaned louder on Tuesdays after the Monday night cleaning crew's mop bucket leaked. Step 21 had been silent since 38, when the previous projectionist had reinforced it the week before his heart gave out, right there in the booth. Inside his domain, the Powers Cameragraph No. 6 projector stood like a precise metal monument to the marriage of engineering and dreams. He ran his fingers along its housing, checking for dust that was never there because he'd cleaned it the night before and would clean it again tonight. Some men had churches. He had this booth, with its small window overlooking 412 seats, each one waiting to be filled with people hungry for stories that weren't their own. The morning routine never varied. Check the carbon arc lamps, 2 fresh pairs installed every 3 days, whether they needed it or not. Examine the aperture plate for scratches that could damage the film. Oil the intermittent movement, that clever mechanism that fooled the eye into seeing motion where there was only a series of still photographs. Clean the lens with a chamois he'd bought in '29 and somehow never lost through depression, war, and widowhood. Mrs. Eleanor Westbrook arrived at 8:15, her Lincoln Continental announcing itself with a wheeze that suggested expensive repair work nobody in San Valdero could properly perform. She was 68, walked with a carved mahogany cane she claimed belonged to her father, and possessed eyes that could audit a ledger or a soul with equal precision. "Morning, Mrs. Westbrook," he called down from the booth window. "Any problems with the equipment?" she asked, as she did every morning, though in 20 months the answer had never been yes. Her voice carried a slight tremor now, something new these past weeks that she tried to hide behind increased brusqueness. Tommy burst through the front doors at 8:20, late as usual, his carefully brilliantined hair already rebelling against its imposed order. 19 years old, second-generation Polish-American, with dreams of Hollywood that practically leaked from his pores. "Sorry, Mrs. W. My mother needed help with—" "Just get the lobby ready," Mrs. Westbrook interrupted, though not unkindly. She had a soft spot for the boy, perhaps because his enthusiasm reminded her of her late husband's passion for the picture business. Rosa Martinez arrived precisely at 8:30, carrying the cash box for the concession stand and the faint scent of the gardenia soap she made herself. 35, widowed by the war like too many women in town, raising her boy Carlos on wages that barely covered rent and groceries. The projectionist watched her from his window, noting the careful way she counted bills, the slight frown that suggested calculations that never quite balanced in her favor. By 9, the first delivery arrived. New film canisters for the weekend shows, shipped from the distribution center in Los Angeles. The projectionist descended to sign for them, his practiced hands checking each seal, each label. The driver, a man named Patterson, who'd been running this route since 1931, shared the latest gossip from the city. "They say television's going to kill the picture business. Little boxes in every home." "They said talkies would ruin movies too," the projectionist replied, hefting a canister. "People still came." The morning rhythms continued. Tommy polished the brass railings while practicing dialogue from last week's feature. Rosa arranged candy boxes with an artist's eye for color and symmetry. Mrs. Westbrook retreated to her office, where she could be heard on the telephone, her voice sharp. "No, Mr. Drummond, I've told you before." Harold Drummond. The projectionist knew that name, knew the type. Town councilman, owned 3 blocks of commercial buildings on Main Street, had plans for San Valdero that involved words like modernization and progress, but really meant money. He'd been circling the Orpheum for months like a vulture waiting for something to die. At noon, the projectionist took his lunch break on the theater's roof, accessed through a ladder in the storage room. From there, he could see the entire town spread out like a diorama. The new subdivision going up to the east, identical houses for returning veterans and their growing families. The old Mexican quarter to the south, where Rosa lived, where the houses leaned together like tired friends. The cemetery on the hill, where his wife lay under a simple stone that read, "Margaret Sullivan, 1905 to 1943. Beloved." Time moved differently in a projection booth. Outside, the world spun through its days at standard speed, but inside, he controlled time. 24 frames per second, each one holding a frozen moment until light and motion brought it to life. Sometimes he wondered if God was just a projectionist in a booth too high to see, running the great reel of existence, occasionally letting the film jump a sprocket. September 15th arrived with unseasonable heat that made the theater's cooling system work overtime, its mechanical breathing audible during quiet scenes. The projectionist had spent the afternoon threading Midnight in Paradise, a romantic melodrama starring Catherine Moreau, the French actress whose accent made American audiences swoon and whose eyes, the publicity materials claimed, held continental mysteries. He inspected each reel with particular care. Nitrate film was temperamental, dangerous even, could ignite at 300 degrees, burn underwater, create its own oxygen. He'd seen a projection booth in San Diego go up in 43, nothing left but twisted metal and the projectionist's wedding ring. These reels looked pristine, though, fresh from the lab, leaders clean, no visible splices. The 7 o'clock showing went perfectly. Housewives and shopgirls filled barely half the seats, handkerchiefs ready for the tragic third act. Tommy stood at the back in his usher's uniform, mouthing dialogue he'd memorized from just 2 viewings. Rosa counted the modest concession take, her fingers quick and sure on the register keys. Between shows, the projectionist rewound the reels, checked the gate for emulsion buildup, adjusted the framing. Mrs. Westbrook climbed the stairs to the booth, something she rarely did anymore. "Good crowd for the late show," she said, slightly winded. "Nearly sold out." The 9:30 screening attracted a different audience. Couples on dates, young men trying to impress girls with their worldliness, a few lone souls seeking escape from rooms too quiet since the war ended. The projectionist started the newsreel. Stories of recovery in Europe. New automobiles rolling off Detroit assembly lines. The world rebuilding itself, frame by frame. Then came the cartoon. a foolish wolf pursuing an impossible rabbit through landscapes that defied physics. Laughter rose from the seats below, that collective sound that never failed to satisfy him, proof that his work mattered, that he was more than just a button pusher. The feature began. Catherine Moreau's name appeared in letters 3 feet tall on the screen below. The projectionist settled into his rhythm, one hand near the changeover switch, ready for the real change at exactly the right second. He'd done this thousands of times, could sense the approaching real end like a musician anticipating a key change. Reel 3 contained the bedroom scene, notorious for pushing the boundaries of the production code. Moreau in a silk negligee, her lover approaching from the shadows, violence implied but never shown. The projectionist had run this scene at the 7 o'clock show without incident. At exactly 9:47, he knew, because he always checked his Elgin pocket watch during reel changes, something happened that would haunt San Valdero for weeks to come. On the screen, Moreau turned toward her fictional lover, arms outstretched. Behind her, on the bedroom wall that should have displayed only William Morris wallpaper and a gilt-framed mirror, appeared a shadow. Not just any shadow, the unmistakable silhouette of a hanging man, rope taut, body pendant, swaying slightly, as if touched by an unfelt wind. The shadow lasted perhaps 2 seconds, 3 at most, but in a darkened theater filled with people primed for romance and melodrama, it might as well have been an eternity. A woman in the 5th row screamed, not a theatrical gasp, but a genuine shriek of terror that cut through the soundtrack like a blade. Others joined her. Someone shouted, "Dear God!" Tommy dropped his flashlight, the metal clattering on the floor adding to the chaos. The projectionist leaned forward, squinting through the booth window. The scene continued normally, Moreau embracing her lover, the shadow gone as suddenly as it had appeared. But the damage was done. People were standing, pushing toward the aisles. Someone knocked over the standee advertising next week's Western. He stopped the projector, something he'd done only once before when a drunk had started a fight in 39. The house lights came up, revealing faces pale with shock, confusion, fear. Mrs. Westbrook stood near the entrance, gripping her cane, trying to restore order with her presence alone. "Please, everyone, remain calm," she called out, but her voice, already weakened by age and illness, barely carried past the 10th row. The projectionist descended from his booth, taking the stairs 2 at a time, despite his bad leg. In the lobby, clusters of patrons huddled, voices rising. "You saw it too? A hanging man, clear as day, right behind her, like a ghost." Mrs. Nussbaum, who ran the bakery on 3rd Street, had fainted. Dr. Benjamin Roth knelt beside her, checking her pulse with professional calm, while his eyes betrayed his own confusion. He'd been in the theater too, had seen what everyone had seen. "What was that thing?" demanded Arthur Coleman, the bank manager, his usual pomposity replaced by something close to panic. The projectionist raised his hands, a gesture that somehow commanded attention. "Folks, I'm not sure what happened, but I'll examine the film immediately. Could have been a technical malfunction, a double exposure at the lab maybe." But even as he spoke, he knew that made no sense. Double exposures happened during filming, not projection, and that shadow, it had been too precise, too deliberate, too real. Tommy appeared at his elbow, face flushed with excitement rather than fear. "I saw it perfect from the back, like someone was hanged right there in the room with her. But that's impossible, right? I mean, it's just a movie." Rosa emerged from behind the concession counter, Carlos clutched against her skirt. She'd brought him for the late show as a treat, and now the boy's eyes were wide with the confusion of a child who couldn't separate screen fantasy from witnessed terror. Within 20 minutes, the theater had emptied. Mrs. Westbrook gave refunds to anyone who asked, though most were too eager to leave to think about their 40 cents. The projectionist returned to his booth, rewound the film to the bedroom scene, and ran it again, alone this time, studying every frame. Nothing. The scene played exactly as it had at 7 o'clock, as it should have played at 9:30. Moreau in her negligee, the lover approaching, the wall behind her showing only wallpaper and mirror. He ran it again and again. Frame by frame now, the mechanical heart of the projector clicking like a metronome, counting out a mystery in 24ths of a second. Still, nothing. By 11:30, his eyes burned from staring. Mrs. Westbrook had gone home, leaving him with keys and instructions to lock up whenever he finished. Tommy had stayed until 11, eager to help, but eventually defeated by the repetitive nothing of their search. Only Rosa remained, having sent Carlos home with her neighbor. She climbed the stairs to the booth, bringing coffee from the concession stand's pot. "You'll go blind staring at it," she said softly. By morning, San Valdero had transformed the shadow into something larger than what anyone had actually seen. The projectionist learned this at Hoffman's Diner, where he stopped for breakfast before opening the theater. Conversations halted when he entered, then resumed in hushed tones, eyes tracking his movement to the counter. "Heard it was a suicide from the 20s, Mabel Hoffman whispered to her sister while pouring his coffee. "Actor who killed himself right on that movie set." No, corrected Jim Bradley from the hardware store. "My wife's cousin says it's a warning. Catherine Moreau's husband died last year. Mysterious circumstances." The projectionist ate his eggs in silence, listening to the mythology growing around him like morning glory vines, beautiful and invasive. The San Valdero Gazette had already sent a reporter to the theater at dawn. He'd found the kid, notebook in hand, trying to peer through the locked doors. At the Orpheum, Mrs. Westbrook sat in her office, the morning paper spread before her. The headline read, "Phantom appears at Picture House. Audience flees in terror." She looked older today, the lines around her eyes deeper, her hands trembling slightly as she folded the paper. 37 years, she said when the projectionist entered. "My husband and I ran this theater for 37 years without a single scandal. Now this." Through her office window, he could see a small crowd gathered outside, pointing at the marquee, taking photographs. A woman held a rosary. Two teenage boys dared each other to touch the door. Father Miguel Santos from St. Augustine's stood at the edge of the group, his expression thoughtful rather than fearful. Tommy arrived breathless, having run from the high school during lunch period. "They're saying we're haunted. Everyone's talking about it. Mary Beth's mother won't let her come to the movies anymore." His excitement dimmed slightly. "That's bad for business, isn't it?" It was. The afternoon showing of Midnight in Paradise drew 17 people, most of them elderly men who'd have watched anything to escape their boarding house rooms. The projectionist ran the film without incident, the bedroom scene passing like any other. Moreau's performance uninterrupted by spectral additions. Rosa counted the meager concession sales, her worry evident in the way she recounted the same bills twice. "Mrs. Chen canceled her daughter's birthday party," she said quietly. "We're supposed to be here Saturday, 12 children." Harold Drummond arrived at 4:15, his Cadillac parking directly in front despite the no parking signs. The projectionist watched from the booth window as the councilman entered, his conversation with Mrs. Westbrook audible even from 2 floors up when their voices rose. "This is a sign, Eleanor. Time to sell. I'm offering a fair price." "A vulture's price, you mean? Be realistic. Who's going to come to a haunted theater?" After Drummond left, the projectionist found Mrs. Westbrook sitting in the auditorium's front row, staring at the blank screen. "My husband loved this place," she said without turning. "Said movies were America's dreams made visible. What do you call it when dreams become nightmares?" That evening, he resumed his investigation. He examined the film stock with a jeweler's loupe borrowed from Kramer's pawn shop, studying each frame of the bedroom scene. The emulsion was perfect. No scratches, no foreign material, no signs of tampering. He checked the projector's gate, the lens, even climbed behind the screen to examine its surface for imperfections that might create shadow effects. Tommy helped, his enthusiasm undimmed. What if it's not the film? What if it's something else? "Like what?" the projectionist asked, adjusting the projector's lamp housing. "I don't know, but in mystery pictures it's never what you think at first." Dr. Roth arrived at 8, carrying his medical bag, though no one had called for him. "Professional curiosity," he explained. "I was in the audience last night. What I saw defied logical explanation, and I don't care for things that do that." Together, they ran the scene again. The doctor stood directly beside the projector, watching the mechanical process while the projectionist observed the screen. Nothing unusual occurred. Moreau performed her scene against an innocent wall. "The human eye can play tricks," Dr. Roth mused. "Mass hysteria, collective delusion. I've read studies from Vienna about such phenomena." "Everyone saw the same thing," the projectionist countered. "That's not delusion. That's something real." Father Santos appeared at the booth door, having climbed the stairs so quietly neither man had heard him approach. "May I?" he asked, gesturing toward the projector. The priest examined the machine with surprising knowledge, asking technical questions about focal length and shutter speed. "I studied photography before seminary," he explained. "Light has always fascinated me. Genesis says it was God's first creation." "And shadows?" the projectionist asked. "Shadows prove light exists," Father Santos replied. "Without light, there can be no shadow. The question is, what cast this particular shadow?" They ran the scene once more, the priest watching intently. When it finished without incident, he nodded slowly. "Show me the schedule. What time exactly did this happen?" The projectionist consulted his log. Every reel change, every minor adjustment was noted in his careful handwriting. 9:47, third reel, approximately 12 minutes in. "And the earlier showing?" 7 o'clock, no problems." Father Santos smiled slightly. "Then perhaps your answer lies not in the film, but in the difference between 7 and 9:47. What changes in those 2 hours and 47 minutes? Before the projectionist could respond, they heard commotion from the street. Through the booth window, they could see a group of people carrying signs. "Close the Devil's Picture House" and "Protect our children from evil." Leading them was Martha Brennan, president of the Ladies' Moral Society, her voice carrying through the evening air as she demanded the theater be shut down immediately. Mrs. Westbrook emerged from the theater entrance, leaning heavily on her cane. "This is private property," she declared, though her voice lacked its usual authority. The projectionist descended quickly, Father Santos and Dr. Roth following. They formed a small barrier between Mrs. Westbrook and the crowd. The priest stepped forward, his collar commanding respect even from the protesters. "Friends," he said calmly, "fear makes us see demons where there may be none. Let's not rush to judgment." The projectionist discovered the pattern by accident, though later he'd wonder if anything in that booth happened without purpose. 3 days after the incident, running the afternoon showing for an audience of 11 souls, he noticed the bedroom scene passed without supernatural interruption. The evening show at 7, same result. But Friday night's late screening brought 3 teenagers who'd snuck out, hoping to see the famous shadow. They left disappointed. He kept a notebook now, recording everything: times, weather, audience size, even the temperature in the booth. Tommy helped, staying after his shifts to assist with what he called the investigation, speaking the word with the reverence others reserved for prayer. "Look at this," Tommy said on Sunday evening, spreading the projectionist's notes across the concession counter while Rosa wiped down the candy case. "The shadow only appeared that one time, but people swear they've seen it since." "Power of suggestion," Rosa offered, though she seemed unconvinced by her own explanation. Her son Carlos had been having nightmares, she'd confided earlier. Dreams about shadows moving on their own. The projectionist studied his records. September 15th, 9:47 p.m. Shadow appeared. September 16th through 21st, multiple showings, nothing. Yet reports kept coming. Mrs. Chen claimed she'd seen it during Thursday's matinee. The Wilkinson brothers swore it appeared Saturday night, though they'd been sitting in different rows and described different positions for the hanging figure. Mrs. Westbrook's health had declined noticeably. She moved through the theater like a ghost herself, checking receipts that showed steady losses. The boycott organized by the Ladies' Moral Society had cut attendance by more than half. Only the curious came now, ghost hunters and thrill seekers who left angry when the shadow failed to perform. On Monday, September 22nd, the projectionist made a decision that would have seemed absurd to anyone but another mechanic. He would run Midnight in Paradise continuously from sunset to sunrise, documenting every screening, searching for variables everyone else had missed. Tommy volunteered to help immediately. "I'll tell my mother I'm studying at the library." "I can't ask you to lie," the projectionist replied. "You're not asking. I'm offering." Rosa surprised them both by offering to stay as well. "Carlos is at his grandmother's tonight. Besides, someone needs to make coffee if you're going to stare at that screen all night." They began at 6:30 as the sun touched the hills west of town. First screening, nothing. Second screening at 8:45, nothing. The projectionist adjusted his position for each showing, watching from different angles, even lying on the booth floor to observe the projector's mechanisms from below. At 10 minutes past 11, during the 4th screening, something changed. Not the shadow, that remained absent. But the projectionist noticed a flicker in the image. So brief, he might have imagined it. He made a note. 11:10 p.m. Possible frame jump? Tommy had fallen asleep in the 3rd row, head tilted back, snoring softly. Rosa sat in the projection booth, reading a movie magazine by the light spilling from the projector. "You're going to drive yourself mad," she said quietly. "Maybe, but madness with method beats sanity without answers." She smiled at that, the first genuine smile he'd seen from her since the incident. "My husband used to say something similar. Called it purposeful stupidity. doing the same thing over and over, but watching for what changes. Smart man. He was. A pause. The war took the smart ones, too. They sat in comfortable silence, the projector's hum filling the space between them. The projectionist found himself aware of her presence in a way he hadn't been before, the soft rhythm of her breathing, the way she tucked her hair behind her ear when concentrating. At 1:15 in the morning, during the 6th screening, he saw it. Not the shadow, something else. The bedroom scene approached, and he positioned himself at the exact angle he'd been standing on September 15th. As Catherine Moreau turned toward her lover, a shape appeared on the wall behind her. But this wasn't the hanging man. This was geometric, angular, like the intersection of two lines. "Rosa, look at this." She joined him at the window. The scene played out, the shape visible for perhaps 1 second. "What is that?" "I don't know, but it's not on the film." They woke Tommy, ran the scene again. This time, the projectionist had Tommy stand outside the theater while he flashed the booth lights on and off. Nothing. They tried reflecting light off a mirror, projecting shadows with cardboard cutouts, everything they could think of to reproduce the effect. At 3:30, exhausted and frustrated, they gave up. The projectionist rewound the film one final time, preparing to lock it in the storage vault. As he handled the metal canister, he noticed something he'd overlooked before. A small notation in pencil on the label. Print number 3, September batch. "What does that mean?" Tommy asked, yawning widely. "It means this isn't the only copy. The distributor sent multiple prints, maybe the others," but Rosa was shaking her head. "I heard Mrs. Westbrook on the phone yesterday. Every theater showing this film in California has reported something. Not the same shadow, but something. The Rialto in Sacramento saw a woman in Victorian dress. The Globe in Fresno reported mysterious lights." The projectionist felt a chill that had nothing to do with the booth's temperature. If this was happening everywhere, it couldn't be a local phenomenon. But it also couldn't be the film itself. He'd examined every frame. Dawn light crept through the booth's small window. Tommy had fallen asleep again, this time sprawled across 3 seats. Rosa stood at the window, watching the town wake up. "My grandmother believed in spirits," she said quietly. "Said they were drawn to places where emotions ran strong. Theaters, churches, hospitals. You believe that? I believe there's more in this world than we understand. But I also believe most mysteries have explanations. We just have to be patient enough to find them." The projectionist joined her at the window. Below, Mr. Kim was opening his grocery store, arranging oranges in precise pyramids. The normalcy of it seemed almost surreal after their night-long vigil. "I need to talk to other projectionists," he said suddenly. "Compare notes. See if there's a pattern across all the theaters. Mrs. Westbrook won't like you calling long distance on her phone. Then I'll use my own money. This isn't about the theater anymore. It's about understanding what's happening." The telephone calls yielded nothing but confirmation of chaos. The projectionist spent $12 of his savings talking to operators in Sacramento, Fresno, and Los Angeles, each reporting different phenomena at different times with no discernible pattern. The only constant was inconsistency, shadows, lights, figures that appeared and vanished without explanation or schedule. On September 28th, Dr. Benjamin Roth climbed the 23 stairs to the projection booth, carrying an unusual burden: a leather case containing a telescope. The projectionist looked up from his maintenance routine, carbon arc lamps spread before him like surgical instruments. "I've been thinking about Father Santos's question," the doctor announced without preamble. "About what changes between 7 and 9:47. Last night, I made observations from my roof." The doctor was known for his amateur astronomy, had even published a paper in Sky and Telescope about meteor shower patterns over the San Joaquin Valley. The projectionist had always thought it an odd hobby for a man who spent his days examining earthbound bodies. "The moon," Dr. Roth continued, setting his case on the small table beside the projector. "On September 15th, the moon rose at 8:53 p.m. By 9:47, it would have been approximately 15 degrees above the horizon, visible from this booth's window." The projectionist paused in his cleaning. Through the booth's small window, he could see the old oak tree that had stood beside the theater since 1923. Its branches reached toward the building like arthritic fingers, one particularly gnarled limb extending almost to the window itself. "You think the moon has something to do with this?" "I think light has everything to do with it." "You're a Navy man. You understand angles and trajectories. What happens when moonlight passes through irregular glass at a specific angle?" Together they examined the window. The glass was original, 1922 manufacture, with the subtle waves and imperfections common to that era. The projectionist ran his fingers along the panes, feeling ripples invisible to the eye but evident to touch. "But I've worked here 20 months, he said. "Why haven't I seen this before?" Dr. Roth pulled out a small notebook filled with calculations. "The moon's position relative to Earth changes in predictable cycles. The angle on September 15th was unique to that night, that time, that position. It won't repeat exactly for 28 days. They spent the afternoon measuring angles, the doctor using instruments the projectionist recognized from his navigation training. Tommy helped, holding measuring tape and calling out numbers, while Rosa watched from the doorway, having brought sandwiches they'd forgotten to eat. "The tree," Rosa said suddenly. "When my grandmother lived in Michoacan, she said trees were conductors between earth and sky. Maybe it's not just the moon and the window. Maybe it's the tree, too." The projectionist studied the oak through the window. Its trunk measured at least 4 feet in diameter, bark deeply furrowed with age. Mrs. Westbrook had mentioned once that it was planted as a memorial, though she couldn't remember for whom. That evening he searched the theater's archives, boxes of records that Mrs. Westbrook's husband had maintained with obsessive detail. In a ledger from 1923 he found it. "Oak sapling, planted June 15th, in memory of Lieutenant James Thornton, killed in action, Bellow Wood, 1918. Tommy, reading over his shoulder, whispered reverently, "A memorial tree. That's why it feels different here. It's honoring the dead. Trees don't have feelings," the projectionist said automatically, though even as he spoke, he remembered nights in the Pacific when he'd sworn the ocean itself grieved for the ships it swallowed. Mrs. Westbrook entered the booth, moving slowly, each step deliberate. She'd been in her office all day, fighting with Drummond over the phone. The stress showed in her pallor, the way she gripped her cane with both hands. "I knew James Thornton," she said, having overheard their conversation. "His mother planted that tree. Said she wanted something living to remember him by, something that would grow taller than his gravestone." She moved to the window, gazed at the oak. "She died in 31, never saw it reach full height. Dr. Roth had been making more calculations, cross-referencing lunar tables with his observations. "October 13th, he announced. "If I'm right, the conditions will repeat on October 13th at 11:22 p.m. Later, because the days are shortening. "That's 2 weeks away," Rosa said. "The theater might not last that long." She was right. Attendance had dwindled to almost nothing. The projectionist had heard Mrs. Westbrook on the phone with the bank, her voice strained as she discussed extensions and mortgages. Drummond circled like a shark, his offers growing more predatory as the theater's situation worsened. That night, the projectionist couldn't sleep. He stood on his apartment building's roof, studying the moon through clouds that moved like torn silk. The city below was quiet, streetlights creating pools of yellow that insects circled endlessly. He thought about light and shadow, about the dead we memorialize and the living we fail to see. The next morning, he found Father Santos in the church garden, tending roses with the patience of a man who understood that beauty required both time and suffering. "I hear you've developed a theory," the priest said without looking up. "Dr. Roth has. Something about moonlight and angles. And you? What do you believe?" The projectionist considered the question. "I believe there's an explanation, something real, measurable, fixable." Father Santos smiled, pruning a dead bloom with practiced precision. "Faith in the mechanical. That's a form of belief, too." He straightened, studied the projectionist with dark eyes that seemed to see more than they should. "The Thornton boy, I didn't know him, but I've read about him. Died trying to save 3 wounded men. Heroes cast long shadows." "You're saying his ghost? I'm saying nothing about ghosts. I'm saying that places remember, not supernaturally, but in the way wood absorbs oil, stone absorbs heat. That theater, that tree, they've been there longer than most of this town. Who's to say what they've witnessed, what they reflect back when conditions are right?" The conversation stayed with the projectionist as he returned to the Orpheum. He found Tommy teaching Rose's son Carlos how to thread a practice reel in the booth. The boy's eyes were bright with concentration, his small hands careful with the film. October arrived with unusual rain that drummed against the theater's roof like impatient fingers. The projectionist sat in the booth with papers spread before him. Lunar charts, sunrise tables, measurements of angles and distances that Dr. Roth had helped calculate. Each figure represented an attempt to transform mystery into mathematics, to reduce the inexplicable to mere geometry. Mrs. Westbrook hadn't been to the theater in 3 days. Her niece from San Francisco had come to help, a sharp-faced woman named Evelyn, who looked at the ledgers with the dispassion of an undertaker measuring for a coffin. "Aunt Eleanor should have sold years ago," she said to no one in particular, though everyone heard. Tommy had grown quieter lately, his Hollywood dreams dimming as he watched the theater die by degrees. He still performed his duties, swept the aisles, polished the brass, arranged lobby cards for films fewer people came to see, but the enthusiasm had leaked out of him like air from a slow puncture. "Found something interesting," he said one afternoon, climbing the stairs to the booth with a box of old records. "Personnel files from before the war. There was another projectionist here, man named Walter Hutchinson. Died in '38. The projectionist took the file, yellowed pages brittle as autumn leaves. Hutchinson's photograph showed a thin man with deep-set eyes, the kind of face that suggested he'd seen too much too young. The records were meticulous, every sick day noted, every complaint logged, every repair documented in handwriting so precise it looked mechanical. "Says here he died in the booth," Tommy continued. "Heart attack during a screening of Angels with Dirty Faces. They found him slumped over the projector, film still running." There was a notation at the bottom of the file in different handwriting. October 31st, 1938. Walter always said he'd die at his post. Prophecy self-fulfilled. E.W. Mrs. Westbrook's initials. The projectionist wondered how many deaths this theater had witnessed, how many final moments had played out while shadows danced on the screen below. He thought of his wife, Margaret, how she'd died while he was at sea, the telegram reaching him 2 weeks late. He'd been showing training films to recruits when she breathed her last, projecting images of survival while she surrendered to the inevitable. Rosa climbed the stairs bringing coffee and news. "Drummond's called a town council meeting for tomorrow night. Word is he's going to propose condemning the building as a public hazard." Can he do that? He's got 3 votes in his pocket already.
Says the theater's attracting undesirable elements, ghost hunters and occultists. She paused, studied the calculations spread across the table. Is Dr. Roth really sure about October 13th? He's staking his reputation on it. And you? What are you staking? The projectionist considered this. 20 months ago, he'd taken this job because he needed work and understood machines. Now he felt bound to this place by threads he couldn't name. Duty to Mrs. Westbrook, perhaps, or to the very idea of the theater as sanctuary. Or maybe it was simpler. He needed to solve this puzzle because puzzles were solvable, unlike so many other things in life. That evening he climbed the oak tree. His bad leg protested, but he'd climbed worse in the Navy. Masts in storms, cargo nets under fire. The bark was rough against his palms, and halfway up he disturbed an owl that regarded him with offended dignity before relocating. From 20 feet up, he could see into the projection booth window. The angle was perfect, or would be when the moon reached the right position. One branch in particular, thick as his thigh and gnarled with age, extended toward the window like an accusatory finger. In the right light, from the right angle, it could cast a shadow that might possibly look like... "You're going to break your fool neck." Dr. Roth stood at the base of the tree, telescope case in hand. "Though I admit, I should have thought of this. Direct observation from the shadow-casting source." The projectionist descended carefully, his shirt torn and hands scraped. "The branch angle is right. With the moon at 15 degrees elevation, the shadow would fall directly onto the screen during that scene. But why that particular shape? Why a hanging man?" They stood together, studying the tree in the failing light. The branch had several smaller offshoots, one hanging vertical, dead wood that should have been pruned years ago, in silhouette. With imagination supplementing observation, it could indeed suggest a figure suspended. Dr. Roth set up his telescope, aimed it at the moon just rising over the hills. 8 days until the 13th. If we're right, we can document it, explain it, end the mystery. And if we're wrong, then the theater closes, Drummond builds his modern shopping complex, and San Valdero loses another piece of its past. Inside the theater, they found Father Santos sitting in the back row, reading by the light of the exit sign. He looked up as they entered, marked his place with a ribbon. "Solving mysteries in the dark?" "Trying to," the projectionist admitted. "Dr. Roth thinks he's found the answer." "Moonlight, angles, and shadows," the doctor explained, his enthusiasm evident.
Pure physics, no phantoms required. Father Santos smiled. The ancient Greeks believed shadows were souls trying to return to the world. The Egyptians thought they were messages from the gods. Now we reduce them to physics. I wonder if we've gained or lost in the translation. Knowledge is always a gain, Dr. Roth said firmly. Perhaps, but mystery has its value too. It makes us wonder, makes us look beyond the visible. The priest stood, moved toward the exit. I'll be here on the 13th. I'm curious to see if your physics can exorcise our ghost. After he left, the projectionist and Dr. Roth sat in the empty theater, the weight of 412 vacant seats pressing around them. Tomorrow's council meeting would likely seal the Orpheum's fate unless they could prove their theory, reduce the supernatural to the merely natural. I've been thinking about patterns, Dr. Roth said suddenly. The reports from other theaters, they're all different, but they all involve light and shadow at specific times. What if this isn't unique to us? What if something about September's films, the way they were lit or shot, makes them susceptible to environmental interference? It was an intriguing thought, but the projectionist was too tired to pursue it. His hands ached from climbing, his bad leg throbbed, and all he wanted was sleep without dreams of shadows. The town council meeting had gone worse than expected. Drummond commanded the room like a revival preacher selling damnation, his voice rising as he described the moral decay the haunted theater represented. 300 citizens packed the courthouse, their faces a map of the town's divisions, the old-timers who remembered the Orpheum's grand opening, the newcomers who wanted progress, the fearful who saw devils in shadows. Mrs. Westbrook had tried to speak, but collapsed halfway through her defense. Dr. Roth caught her before she hit the floor, and now she lay in San Valdero General, her niece Evelyn standing guard like a carrion bird waiting for the inevitable. The council had voted to postpone their decision until October 14th, one day after the projectionist's calculated proof would arrive. On the morning of October 11th, he stood before the oak tree with a borrowed saw, Rosa beside him holding a ladder. The solution was simple. Cut the dead branch that created the hanging man silhouette. No branch, no shadow, no ghost. "You sure about this?" Rosa asked. "That tree's a memorial." "I'm trimming dead wood, not cutting it down. Lieutenant Thornton wouldn't want his memorial causing fear." He climbed carefully, the saw hanging from his belt. The October air was sharp with the smell of burning leaves from the neighborhood yards. Below, Tommy kept watch for Drummond or his allies, who'd been monitoring the theater like hawks since the council meeting. The dead branch was farther out than he'd remembered, requiring him to edge along the main limb like a tightrope walker. 20 feet below, Rosa watched with her hand pressed to her mouth. The saw bit into the wood, each stroke releasing the scent of old growth, decades of sun and rain compressed into fiber. Halfway through, the branch cracked unexpectedly. The projectionist grabbed for support as the limb twisted, his weight shifting dangerously. The saw fell, clattering through branches before hitting the ground. For a moment, he hung suspended, his bad leg tangled in smaller branches, his hands gripping bark that crumbled like old plaster. "Hold on!" Rosa was already climbing, moving with surprising agility for someone in a skirt. She reached him as his grip began to fail, her strong hands guiding his foot to a stable branch. "Thanks," he managed, his heart hammering against his ribs. "Carlos climbs trees constantly. I've gotten good at rescue." She was close enough that he could see flecks of gold in her brown eyes, smell the lavender soap she used.
Though he's considerably lighter than you. They descended together, her presence steady beside him. On the ground, Tommy had retrieved the saw, his face pale with relief. "Thought we were going to be investigating a different kind of death," he said, attempting humor that didn't quite mask his concern. The projectionist studied the partially cut branch from below. It hung at an odd angle now, still attached but twisted. If anything, it looked more ominous than before, a broken neck instead of a clean hanging. That afternoon, Father Santos visited the theater, finding the projectionist in the booth adjusting the projector's arc lamp. The priest carried a manila folder thick with papers. "I've been researching Lieutenant Thornton," he said, spreading documents across the table. "His death was unusual." The papers included military records, newspaper clippings, letters. One photograph showed a young man in uniform, barely Tommy's age, with eyes that seemed too knowing for his years. "He was executed," Father Santos continued quietly. "Not killed in battle, court-martialed for refusing an order that would have sent his entire unit into certain death. They shot him at dawn, October 13th, 1918, a month before the armistice." The projectionist felt the booth grow cold. October 13th, the same date Dr. Roth had calculated for the moon's return to position. "His mother never knew," the priest added. "The army told her he died heroically. She planted that tree believing her son was a hero." "He was," Rosa said from the doorway, having climbed the stairs silently. "He saved his unit by refusing that order." Father Santos nodded. "Truth takes many forms. Sometimes a lie serves it better than facts." They stood in silence, contemplating the weight of history, the shadows cast by decisions made in trenches 30 years gone. Outside, the oak tree moved in the wind, its branches scraping against the building like fingers tapping for admission. Dr. Roth arrived at sunset, his telescope and notebooks in hand. "I've confirmed the calculations. Tomorrow night, 11:22 p.m., the moon will be precisely positioned. We'll have our proof." "There's something else," the projectionist said, and told him about Thornton's execution date. The doctor's rationalist certainty wavered. "Coincidence. It has to be." "Does it?" Father Santos asked gently. "Or do some truths transcend your physics?" They prepared for the next night like soldiers preparing for battle. Tommy brought extra light bulbs. Rosa prepared coffee strong enough to wake the dead, then apologized for the phrase. The projectionist cleaned the projector with unusual care, as if the machine itself needed to be pure for what was coming. Mrs. Westbrook, against doctor's orders, had herself driven to the theater in the evening. Her niece supported her into the office, where she sat behind her husband's desk like a captain determined to go down with her ship. "If this is the Orpheum's last night," she said, voice thin but determined, "I'll spend it here." The projectionist wanted to promise her it wasn't, that Dr. Roth's calculations would save them. But promises were dangerous things, easily broken by the weight of reality. Instead, he climbed to his booth and began threading Midnight in Paradise one more time. The film felt heavier tonight, as if the celluloid itself had absorbed the weight of repetition, of fear, of hope. He thought about Lieutenant Thornton, 19 years old, standing before a firing squad on an October morning, refusing to send other boys to meaningless death. Some shadows, he realized, were cast by actions so bright they burned through time itself.
October 13th arrived with crystalline clarity, the kind of night that made astronomers thank their fortune and farmers worry about frost. The projectionist checked his equipment for the third time, hands steady despite the crowd gathering in the theater below.
Word had spread through San Valdero like wildfire. Tonight, the mystery would either be solved or the theater would face its final curtain. Dr. Roth had positioned himself with military precision. One telescope trained on the moon, another on the projection booth window. His notebooks lay open, covered with calculations that looked more like arcane symbols than mathematics. 11:22, he repeated like a mantra. The moon will reach exactly 15.3 degrees elevation at 11:22. Father Santos sat in the third row, rosary beads moving through his fingers in rhythm with some internal prayer. He'd brought several parishioners, old women mostly, who clutched their own beads like lifelines. The projectionist wondered if they were praying for revelation or protection. Tommy manned the doors, turning away latecomers once the theater reached capacity. 412 seats, all filled, plus people standing in the aisles despite fire regulations. Drummond had claimed the back row, flanked by his council allies, their skepticism worn like armor against whatever might manifest. Rosa stood near the concession stand, Carlos asleep in her arms despite the crowd's nervous energy. She caught the projectionist's eye, offered a small smile that somehow steadied his nerves more than all of Dr. Roth's calculations. Mrs. Westbrook sat in her husband's favorite seat, front row center, her niece Evelyn beside her, looking disapproving of the entire production. The old woman's face was pale but determined, her hands folded over the head of her cane like a queen holding court one last time. At 10:45, the projectionist started the film. Not from the beginning. He'd calculated exactly where to begin, so the bedroom scene would play at 11:22. The audience sat in unusual silence. No whispers, no rustling candy wrappers. Just 400 people breathing in unison, waiting. The film unspooled through the projector's gate. 24 frames per second of manufactured dreams. Catherine Moreau appeared on screen, her beauty luminous even in black and white. The projectionist had seen this scene so many times he could run it with his eyes closed, knew every gesture, every shadow that belonged. 11:15. The bedroom scene approached. Through the booth window, he could see the oak tree silhouetted against the rising moon, its branches still, except for the partially cut limb that hung at its broken angle. Dr. Roth adjusted his telescope, called out measurements to his assistant, a high school science teacher named Patterson, who'd volunteered to help document the event. 11:19. Moreau entered the bedroom set, moving with the languid grace that had made her famous. The projectionist's hands hovered near the projector, though there was nothing to adjust. Either the shadow would appear, or it wouldn't. Either they'd found the answer, or they'd simply deepened the mystery. 11:21. The moon crept higher, a silver eye examining the town's small drama. The projectionist could feel the audience holding its breath, 400 people becoming a single organism united in anticipation. Even Drummond had leaned forward, his skepticism cracking under the weight of collective expectation. 11:22. Moreau turned toward her fictional lover, arms outstretched in invitation. Behind her, on the bedroom wall that had shown only wallpaper for weeks, a shadow materialized. Not suddenly, it grew like a living thing, spreading across the wall with deliberate purpose. The hanging man. Clear as photograph,
dark as guilt, swaying slightly, though no wind existed in that fictional room. The rope, the angle of the head, the limp surrender of the body, all perfectly defined, perfectly terrible. But this time the projectionist was ready. He'd positioned a second projector with a spotlight, aimed it through the booth window at the oak tree. The beam illuminated the broken branch, showed how its shadow fell across the screen at precisely the right angle, how the moonlight transformed dead wood into dead man. "There!" Dr. Roth shouted, triumph in his voice. "Look at the tree. It's the branch casting the shadow." Half the audience turned to look through the windows, seeing the illuminated oak, understanding flooding their faces. The other half remained fixed on the screen, where the shadow continued its ghastly dance until Moreau moved, breaking the angle, returning the wall to innocence. The lights came up. For a moment, nobody moved, as if movement might shatter the revelation. Then Mrs. Westbrook stood, slowly, using her cane for support, and began to clap. Others joined her, applause rippling through the theater, not for the film, but for the solved mystery, for the restoration of the rational world. Drummond remained seated, his face sour with disappointment. He'd wanted the theater to fail, wanted his modern vision to replace old dreams. The projectionist watched him leave without a word, his allies trailing behind like shadows themselves. Dr. Roth climbed to the booth, face flushed with vindication. Pure physics, just as I said. The moon, the angle, the branch, a perfect alignment that occurs only when conditions are exactly right. "But why October 13th?" Father Santos asked, having joined them. "Why the anniversary of Thornton's death?" "Coincidence," Dr. Roth insisted, though with less certainty than before. The projectionist said nothing. He'd felt something in that moment when the shadow appeared, something beyond physics or coincidence. Not a ghost, he didn't believe in ghosts, but perhaps an echo, the kind Father Santos had described, where places remember what they've witnessed. Tommy burst into the booth, eyes bright with excitement. "The newspapers will go crazy! Mystery solved by local doctor. We'll be famous!" "The theater will survive," Rosa said quietly. And that seemed more important than fame. They stood together in the booth, an unlikely congregation, the projectionist with his mechanical faith, the doctor with his rational certainty, the priest with his comfortable mysteries, the widow with her quiet strength, the boy with his unlimited dreams. Below them, the audience dispersed slowly, reluctantly, as if leaving might mean losing something precious. Mrs. Westbrook appeared in the doorway, Evelyn supporting her. "Gentlemen," she said, voice stronger than it had been in days. "Lady?" She nodded to Rosa. "You've saved the Orpheum. My husband would be grateful." The morning after the revelation brought unexpected complications. The projectionist arrived at the theater to find a small crowd gathered around the oak tree, some taking photographs, others actually praying. Someone had tied ribbons to the trunk, yellow ones, like those worn for soldiers who hadn't come home. Inside, Mrs. Westbrook sat with the San Valdero Gazette editor, her color better than it had been in weeks, as if solving the mystery had restored something vital. "We're saying the film has been repaired," she explained to the projectionist. "No need to elaborate about branches and moonlight. People prefer their mysteries simple or absent entirely." It was a lie, but a kind one. The truth, that perfect confluence of astronomy, architecture, and accident, was somehow both more mundane and more magical than any ghost story. The projectionist understood. He'd learned in the Navy that sometimes the technical manual was less important than what people needed to believe. Tommy had already written his version for the school paper, a careful account titled "The Persistence of Investigation." He showed it to the projectionist proudly, pages typed on the theater's old underwood. The boy had managed to explain the shadow without mentioning Lieutenant Thornton's execution, preserving both truth and dignity. "You're learning," the projectionist told him. "Sometimes the whole truth serves nobody." "My father would have liked this story," Tommy replied. "He always said Americans love mysteries, but love solutions more." By afternoon, work had begun on the oak tree. Not removal, Mrs. Westbrook had been firm about that, but careful pruning by a specialist from Sacramento. The broken branch came down in pieces, each one examined by curious onlookers, as if it might reveal secrets. The projectionist kept one small section, not from superstition, but as a reminder that the ordinary could cast extraordinary shadows. Rosa found him on the roof during lunch, his usual retreat when the world below became too complicated. She carried 2 sandwiches and a thermos of coffee, settling beside him with the ease of someone who'd grown comfortable with silence. "Carlos wants to know if the ghost is really gone," she said. "What did you tell him?" "That ghosts are just shadows we don't understand yet. When we understand them, they become something else." That's philosophical for a 7-year-old. He's had to grow up fast. She unwrapped her sandwich, paused. His father's death, my working all hours. Children adapt, but they also see things we miss. He knew I was frightened these past weeks, not of the shadow, but of losing my job, our stability. The projectionist understood. Fear took many forms, and financial terror could be worse than any ghost. He'd seen it in the breadlines during the Depression, in the faces of sailors who'd lost everything except their lives. "Mrs. Westbrook won't sell now," he offered. "The theater's safe. For how long? She's not well, and that niece has calculator eyes. She sees everything in columns of figures." Below them, San Valdero spread out in its familiar pattern. The projectionist could see Drummond's Cadillac parked outside the bank, probably arranging financing for his next scheme. Progress would come eventually, whether the town wanted it or not. But for now, the Orpheum would continue its dreams. That evening brought an unexpected visitor. Evelyn Westbrook climbed the stairs to the projection booth, her city shoes clicking on each step like a typewriter counting costs. She examined the equipment with shrewd eyes, running one manicured finger along the projector's housing. "This machine is worth something," she said without preamble. "The whole setup properly marketed to a museum or collector." "It's not for sale," the projectionist replied. "Everything's for sale. It's just a matter of price." She turned to face him directly. "My aunt is dying. Oh, not tomorrow or next week, but soon. Dr. Roth gives us 6 months at most. What happens to all this, then?" He had no answer. Mrs. Westbrook had no children, and Evelyn was her only living relative. The thought of the Orpheum gutted, its projectors sold to collectors, its seats ripped out for a shopping complex, hit him with unexpected force. "I'm not a monster," Evelyn continued, her voice softer. "I understand what this place means to the town. But I also understand financial reality. The theater barely breaks even in good months. Without the ghost story drawing crowds, how long before it's running at a loss again?" She left him with that question hanging in the air, like a different kind of shadow. The projectionist ran the evening show mechanically, his mind elsewhere. The feature was a Western, All simple morality and clear horizons, nothing like the complex shadows life actually cast. After the last patron left, he found Father Santos waiting in the lobby, studying the photographs on the wall. Decades of premieres, visiting stars, community gatherings. "Troubled?" the priest asked. "Thinking about endings. All stories end. The question is whether they end with period or ellipsis." Father Santos moved to another photograph, this one showing the theater's grand opening in 1922. "Did you know Lieutenant Thornton's mother attended that opening? She's in this picture, third row, wearing black." The projectionist looked closer. A small woman, face marked by loss but lifted toward the screen with something like hope. She'd planted the oak tree 1 year later, creating a memorial that would eventually cast its shadow into the future in ways she never imagined. Dr. Roth solved the how, Father Santos continued, but not the why. Why that particular night? Why that precise angle? Why did everything align so perfectly to create that image? "You're suggesting divine intervention?" "I'm suggesting that some patterns are too perfect for pure chance. Call it what you like, fate, providence, the universe's sense of irony." The shadow appeared when the theater needed a mystery, and the mystery was solved when it needed salvation. The priest left him with that thought, footsteps fading into the night. The projectionist climbed back to his booth, sat in the chair worn to his shape by countless hours. Through the window, the pruned oak stood against the stars, its branches no longer capable of casting shadows that looked like hanging men. 2 weeks had passed since the night of revelation, and November had settled over San Valdero like a comfortable blanket. The projectionist arrived early as always, but the theater felt different now. Not haunted or mysterious, just old and patient. Like a grandfather who'd told his best story and could now rest. The morning light filtered through the booth window differently without the overhanging branch. Cleaner, somehow, less complicated. He missed the shadows, strange as that seemed. There was something to be said for mystery, even manufactured mystery. Even mystery that turned out to be nothing more than wood and moonlight. Mrs. Westbrook had returned to her daily visits, though she moved more slowly, paused more often. This morning she brought news. Attendance had actually increased since the solution. People came now not for ghosts, but for the story of the ghost, to sit where the famous shadow had appeared, to be part of San Valdero's strangest tale. Drummond withdrew his condemned building proposal, she said, settling into the office chair with visible relief. Can't condemn a building that's just been proven structurally sound by half the town's witnesses. Tommy bounded up the stairs, carrying the new film canisters for the weekend. "Mrs. W., there's a man here from Paramount Studios. Says he heard about our mystery, wants to maybe make a picture about it." The projectionist and Mrs. Westbrook exchanged glances. Hollywood, coming to their small theater, drawn by shadows. There was an irony there too large to fully grasp. The Paramount man was exactly what you'd expect. Sharp suit, slick hair, smile that never quite reached his eyes. He walked through the theater like he already owned it, making notes in a leather-bound book, asking questions about dramatic potential and narrative arc. "We'd change some details, of course," he explained over lunch at Hoffman's Diner. "Make the projectionist younger, more handsome. Add a love interest. Maybe the ghost is his lost love. Test audiences respond well to romance mixed with mystery." The truth isn't dramatic enough? Rosa asked. She'd joined them at the projectionist's request, sensing he needed an ally against this smooth-talking future. Truth is rarely good box office, the man replied without irony. They sent him away with non-committal promises to consider his offer. The projectionist felt relief watching the man's car disappear toward Los Angeles, carrying its cargo of manufactured dreams back where they belonged. That evening, Father Santos visited the booth one last time. He'd been transferred, he explained, to a parish in San Francisco. The Archbishop feels I've become too comfortable here, too involved in temporal mysteries rather than spiritual ones. They stood together at the window, watching the sun set behind the pruned oak. The tree looked healthier somehow, as if removing the dead branch had given the rest new life. "What do you think really happened here?" the projectionist asked. "I think a young man died bravely in 1918. I think his mother planted a tree in his memory. I think that tree grew and cast shadows. And one night, through perfect coincidence or imperfect providence, one of those shadows told a story that saved this theater." The priest smiled. "I also think explanations are less important than effects." This place mattered to people. The shadow, real or imagined, reminded them of that. After Father Santos left, the projectionist found Rosa closing up the concessions stand. Carlos was with her, carefully stacking candy boxes with the seriousness of a boy given real responsibility. "I've been thinking," she said, not quite meeting his eyes, "about what Evelyn said, about the theater's future. And maybe it doesn't need to be either or. Maybe there's a way to preserve what matters while still adapting to what's coming." She paused, seemed to gather courage. "I've been taking business courses by correspondence. I have ideas, ways to make this place profitable without losing its soul." The projectionist studied her, this woman who'd appeared in his life as quietly as shadows on walls, who'd stood beside him through mystery and revelation without asking for anything except stability for her son. "You should talk to Mrs. Westbrook," he said. "She'd listen to you. Would you?" "Listen, I mean, if I had ideas that changed things." He thought about change, about his life these past 20 months, about the comfort of routines and the disruption of shadows. "I'm learning that change isn't always loss. Sometimes it's just transformation." Rosa smiled, the expression transforming her face from careful to radiant. "My grandmother would have liked you. She always said the wisest men were those who knew the difference between what to preserve and what to release." Later, alone in his booth, the projectionist threaded the night's feature, a comedy this time, something light and forgettable. The audience below laughed at predictable moments, finding comfort in the expected. He understood that need, the desire for stories that resolved cleanly, where shadows were just shadows and mysteries had solutions. But he also understood now what Father Santos meant. The shadow on the wall hadn't been supernatural, but it had been supernatural, beyond natural, more than the sum of its parts. It had brought together a community, saved a landmark, created a story that would outlive everyone who'd witnessed it. He thought about Lieutenant Thornton, 19 years old, facing a firing squad rather than sending men to meaningless death. Some people cast long shadows not through the magnitude of their lives, but through the quality of their choices. The tree had been cut down to a memorial. The memorial had cast a shadow. The shadow had become a story. The story had saved something worth saving. The projector hummed its familiar song, light passing through celluloid to create illusions of life on the screen below. 24 times per second. Darkness interrupted by light. The interruptions so fast, the eye saw only continuity.
That was the real magic. Not ghosts or shadows, but the human ability to see patterns, find meaning, create significance from accident. Tomorrow he would come back, climb the 23 stairs, clean the equipment that never needed cleaning, thread new dreams through the gate. Rosa would be there with her correspondence courses and careful plans. Tommy would dream of Hollywood while learning the projectionist's trade. Mrs. Westbrook would hold on as long as she could, and when she couldn't, perhaps Rosa's vision would carry the theater forward. And somewhere, in the space between light and shadow, between truth and legend, the Orpheum would continue its patient work, taking the ordinary world and making it, for 90 minutes at a time, extraordinary.